Hi, Andrei. Good to meet you today.
Good to meet you too.
This is an interview about a performance marketing manager in our company. So maybe tell me a little bit about your background in 3 minutes or less.
Yeah, absolutely. I started off my career in communications. I then moved to startups and kind of more performance-driven marketing because this is where I see the most impact I can make. And I worked with various startups over the last 6 years from very early stage to Series D startups. And I owned different acquisition programs across different channels, ranging from Facebook to Google to TikTok and influencer marketing. And I'm really driven by this area of growth marketing because I can see immediate impact you can make, and it's always changing and evolving industry.
Um,
And now I'm looking for my next role as a performance marketing manager.
yeah, so what are you looking for in your next role?
Yeah, I'm looking to join a startup because I enjoy working at fast-paced environments. I'm looking to join a company where I can launch all our acquisition program from scratch and work on both strategy and execution. But also want to have opportunity to partner with design teams, product teams, engineering, and kind of work cross-functionally. And then finally, I already mentioned impact. So I want to work on something impactful where I can see results and something innovative so that innovative tech products is something that really interests me.
Cool. That's exactly what we are doing here. So I'm going to ask you some questions about your performance marketing experiences. So which metrics and KPIs were you optimizing for? Did they differ from channel to channel?
Yeah, great question. Let me think for a second. So I think when it comes to different metrics and KPIs, they definitely differ based on channels. I think the core metric are conversion rates, CTRs, ROAS, which is return on ad spend, and cost per acquisition or cost per action, which is kind of the core action, conversion action you want a user to take. When it comes to different channels, if we take, for example, a Google search, it's more focused on cost per click and quality score optimization. If you're taking social media such as Facebook or Instagram, you want to be looking at CPMs and brand engagement rates. And if you're working on display advertising, it's you should prioritize impressions and reach. So these are kind of the key differences between different channels and their metrics.
Can you share an example of a successful campaign you have managed in the past and the strategies you implemented to improve performance?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me think about an example which might be the most relevant when it comes to this role. So I'm going to talk about an Facebook ad test that I run for one of the startups I worked at. And our campaign goal was to drive app installs at an efficient cost per install. And our target audience was pet owners. So some of the strategies that I implemented, first, I made sure that the targeting is right. So we're using the right audience segmentation. And one of the specific tactics is building a lookalike audience based on the users that we already had in the app. The other piece of the strategy is all things creative. So I developed creatives working with a designer, and part of this test was running A/B tests as part of this launch.
Mhm.
And then Facebook, it also includes Instagram. So I worked on launching it across both of the channels. And as a result, this test was successful, which means that we were able to drive thousands of new installs within our cost per install range. And most importantly, those users, they had a relatively high retention. So they were sticking and using the product, which means that we acquired the right audience and we just didn't get random users as part of this test.
Oh, that's very cool. Can you share a specific example of a ad experiment you run, and why did you choose to run this experiment?
Yeah, sure. I think part of any performance marketing role is running continuous experiments, and it's just
Hmm.
like part of your job. You want to be running experiments continuously and iterate on them. But to give you a specific example, I'm going to talk about experimenting with two different creatives. And the goal and the objective of this experiment was to improve conversion rates. So conversion from ad view to click and then to install. And the hypothesis was that one creative with more value focused message would outperform a creative which has the more brand focused message.
Hmm.
And in terms of methodology, I used it was an A/B test using Facebook built-in A/B testing tool, and I evaluated performance based on click-through rate and cost per conversion. And the result was that after running this experiment for a week, we saw that the value focused creative led to a 15% increase in conversions, which confirmed our initial hypothesis.
It's typically like your experiment cycle is like a week, or like more or less than that.
Good question. So the short answer is it depends. The more kind of nuanced answer to it is, I think one of the main factors here is I would say there is like a standard duration, which is yes, around 1 or 2 weeks. But the key here is to get to statistical significance.
Hmm.
Uh, but you can actually have a shorter time frame if you have more volume
Hmm.
uh, of either installs or conversions, which typically means that you have higher budgets.
Hmm.
But then on the flip side, if you have lower budgets, you have lower volume of traffic. So this means that you'll probably want to run the experiment for more than 2 weeks.
Gotcha. Okay. And what has been some of the biggest learning you have had in the world of performance marketing recently?
Yeah, as I mentioned, this is like the thing that excites me. It's an evolving kind of
Hmm.
area of marketing, and things always change. There are always new channels and tactics. But in terms of the learnings, I think one of the main ones is like you have to keep in mind consumer behavior patterns, and it's not only all about real-time data,
Hmm.
but it's also about understanding consumer psychology and their behavior. So this is probably one of the main learnings recently.
Gotcha. Um, and what do you think is the biggest optimization lever? How do you optimize your campaigns for the maximum ROI?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm always looking to optimize campaign performance. This is part of the job. I talked a little bit about experimentation. The main lever, I'd say, is audience targeting. So making sure that the ads are shown to the most relevant users. Another one is creative optimization. So making sure you're running and testing new creatives, and creatives can actually improve your performance really significantly.
Okay, cool. So it's a audience targeting and also creative optimization. Um,
Yes.
okay. In my practice, I often find like tracking and attribution is probably the hardest blocker at the beginning. So can you tell me about the time when your attribution setup was not working and you had to fix it?
Yeah, great question. We haven't talked about attribution yet, but as you said, it's like a huge part of this job. Let me think for a second.
Hmm.
Um, I remember a time when I noticed some discrepancies between conversion data in Google Analytics and the ad platform itself. And sometimes it's normal to see some discrepancies, but it was like a pretty noticeable difference. So what I did is I checked for any recent changes in tracking tags or pixel setups. So thankfully, there is a change log that you can quickly take a look at. I also analyzed data flows to spot if there's anything missing or any duplicates. And what I discovered is that I had to, some of the tags were misfiring. So I had to reconfigure them so they fire correctly across each of the touch points. And I also tested the attribution model that we use to make sure that it's accurate and it's consistent across different channels. And as a result, we got more accurate reporting, which aligned between different reporting platforms such as Google Analytics and Google itself.
So you basically, if I understand correctly, you are using different platform to cross validating your accuracy of the reports and attribution.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, and the reason why you want to do this is because as you said, to cross check and compare. And
Mhm.
when something looks off, you're able to catch this discrepancy.
Gotcha. And can you explain the changes and the limitations introduced by iOS 14, right? And how do these limitations affect your attribution in your setup?
Yeah, absolutely. So iOS 14, when first introduced, it was actually a huge change to the way pretty much all of performance marketing works and is measured. So what iOS 14 did is it introduced app tracking transparency, or ATT, which limits third-party data tracking, and it requires user consent to get this third-party data tracking. And what it did, it reduced granularity of data. It delayed reporting, and also it impacted retargeting and lookalike audiences. So these are limitations. And then when it comes to like how it actually impacted performance marketing, we had to shift to aggregated event measurement versus like user level reporting, so that we could comply with these privacy limitations. And we also had to adapt to strategies that focus on server-side tracking and consent-driven reporting. So yeah, again, this was a huge change, but there are certain ways to go around these limitations.
I see. You also talked about some of the workaround, and like when you're working with attribution, what are some common challenges, like associated with using scan? How did you address them?
Mentioned some of the challenges, for example, like reduced granularity of data, but to name a few others, it's first of all, it became a much more complex setup.
Hmm.
So it got more difficult to configure your setup and event tracking. It's also became much more challenging to have consistent data flow between platforms. So you would see more discrepancies between that platform and maybe your attribution platform. Now, when it comes to how to kind of address this and some of the solutions, first of all, you have to do regular checks for data discrepancy. You need to maintain detailed documentation and kind of have records of all the events and what they mean. You also need to make sure like the team that's working on it are all on the same page and are trained and understand all the scan limitations.
Gotcha. And how do you identify trends or patterns in the campaign data? And how do you using that information to improve future campaigns?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd say it's a pretty broad question. Like I spend a lot of time analyzing data and campaign performance in my day-to-day
Mhm.
work. In terms of how I, identify these trends, I use different tools such as, well, spreadsheet is the number one, Google Analytics, I also use Tableau, to visualize the performance data. I typically, depending on the KPIs, I look at how they change or any patterns in, for example, click-through rates or cost per installs or CPMs and other metrics. And then once I kind of identify these patterns, I identify high-performing segments or creatives or audiences, and I can allocate more dollars and spend to these audiences. And on the flip side, I can reduce spend on some of the worst performing segments. And I can also adjust targeting and messaging based on this analysis that I'm doing.
Cool. And let's take the one of the areas you focus most, which is creative testing, as an example here. Like what's your approach, to creative testing using like a data-driven approach, I guess.
Yeah, so creative is one of the biggest levers to improve performance,
Hmm.
and you have to be running creative tests continuously.
Hmm.
In terms of approach, first you need to define your objective and define like the specific metrics you will be measuring success. So whether it's CTR or conversion rate or cost per install, then you need to have the proper setup for A/B testing. You need to make sure you iterate on the results of your tests. And I think most importantly, you need to have a partnership with your creative team. So you need to be communicating the results of the tests you're running, ideating new creatives, giving feedback on new creatives, and really have this tight knit, collaborative partnership with the design team. And finally, you need to use your analytics tool to analyze the results of your tests.
And how do you determine the optimal cycle for creative testing?
Yeah, the optimal cycle, again, I think it depends on what's the campaign, what type of budgets you're managing. So, what kind of traffic volume you have, how fast can you get to statistical significance, and what are the campaign goals? So, there is really no like one fits all approach to it. But I think something we talked about where you have like a week or 2 weeks for each test, this is kind of you can use it as a rough benchmark.
Maybe walk me through an example of a creative test you recently run, like the testing method you choose and campaign setup, and also what metrics you use to measure the success.
Yeah, there were dozens of tests that are ran. Maybe one that stood out to me was when I launched a creative test for on Facebook targeting millennials, and there was two different ad variants, one with more lifestyle imagery, and the other one was more product focused imagery. And it was for an app that helps you find tennis partners. So imagine one is like you would see like a tennis player, and the other would be more like actual showing the app where you can match with tennis players within your geo. So both of these ads, this was an A/B test. They ran concurrently, so they had a similar budget and targeting. And I monitored CTRs, engagements, and conversion rates. So I ran this for 2 weeks. And ultimately, the lifestyle focused ad had a 20% higher CTR and lower cost per install. So this was a winner, and we moved and it improved our overall performance.
Cool. Yeah. Can you also give me an example of a successful collaboration between the performance marketing and your design teams?
Yeah, let me think for a second. So, successful collaboration with performance marketing and design teams. I touched on it a little bit. Like, it's really important to have this collaboration. But one example that I had recently is collaborating on a Black Friday campaign to boost e-commerce sales. I wanted to bring the teams together, so we had a brainstorm sessions where we ideated on creative concepts and the target and made sure we all know that target audience insights. Established a feedback loop, so regular check-ins to ensure that all the designs kind of match our goals. And it's really the key there was to have a constant line of communication. And what we did is we developed a set of creatives that showcased this promotion. And when I tested it, we saw a 25% increase in conversions. And then I had a meeting where I shared these results. And I couldn't have achieved these results without collaborating with design team. And it was really empowering for the design team to see the results of their work and attached to like an actual sales and dollar amount, which just boosted their motivation. So I think having this feedback loop and not only collaborating at the beginning of the project when you create these ads, but also communicating the results of the test is super important.
Cool. It seems you have a lot of experiences working across teams for performance marketing. I'm going to ask you something that you are not great at and trying to improve.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, excellent question. Um, I'm always trying to improve, always trying to learn something new, staying on top of the industry trends and developments, testing different tools. But when it comes to something that I'm not great at, I'd say copywriting is something that I want to improve on. Being a non-native English speaker, it's just a bit more challenging for me to come up with a concise and persuasive copy. So this is something I want to improve on.
Yeah, that's something I'm trying to improve as well. Uh, Tell me a time when you had to solve a problem you knew nothing about, and how did you approach it?
Yeah, excellent question. These type of situations, they come up from time to time, and I think this is part of why this role is so exciting because there's very little routine to it, and there are constantly new challenges. I think one of the problems that I faced recently that I knew nothing about is working on a campaign with a sales team,
Mhm.
and I didn't really know how they approach sales and with sales-driven motion to closing new deals. So I wanted to drive more leads to the sales team, but I didn't really know how, like, what do they do with these leads? How do they engage with them? And I didn't know what the best approach was. So I met with a sales leader. He walked me through the process. We came up with a plan and like specific audiences and segments we want to drive. And as a result, there was a test launched, and we drove sales qualified leads, and the sales team was able to close more deals. But the key here was just to learn about as much as you can about the process, about their sales process, which was new to me.
So cool. Thanks for your time today. This concludes our interview today.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and for next, I'm going to interview you about your, like this mock interview experiences you had using Synco as a AI assistant running on the side. Approximately, what percentage of Synco's suggestion did you utilize during this interview?
I think maybe 75%.
Okay.
So quite a few. Yeah.
Oh, that's big. And did having Synco open during this interview make you feel more confident or anxious?
Definitely, I felt more confident because I knew that even if I were asked a question which I knew like nothing about, I would at least be given a structure of
Hmm.
how to respond to it. And this is already kind of half of the success to responding to a question. and I could kind of like build on it from my own experience. But having like this structure just like boosts confidence in giving the right answer.
Cool. And if you right now and Synco and checking the feedback, I'm wondering if Synco's feedback summary tells you something new about, like this interview, how it goes. So if you
Mm.
go right now, turn off the interview and just to check
Um,
get the feedback.
Yeah, I could see that, particularly when discussing his approach to creative testing. Non-native English speaking mentions to improve his copywriting skills. So this is interesting because this was part of the question, but it actually like, gave me feedback on it.
Hmm.
But I think overall, like this looks accurate.
There's
Uh,
another communication style report as well. If you tap on the drop down button from the feedback option, there's a specific communication feedback
okay, let's take a look at that. This is interesting.
because it mentions about communication. So that's another
Hmm.
more specific report just about communication.
Okay, clarity, conciseness, detailed responses. Yeah, I would love to spend more time kind of digging into it, but I'm merely looking at weaknesses.
Hmm.
Some answers are lengthy, including unnecessary details. Yeah, probably. It would be great to see like specifically
Hmm.
which answers felt like that. I like that it gives suggestions here. So yeah, this is helpful. Yeah, I like these examples. I think it would be helpful to see like what exactly uh, the Cinco thought was, not consistent.
I see. Yeah.
Um,
More
yeah,
examples.
yeah. Tone too formal. Well, it's an interview, so. But higher, my higher engagement. Yeah, I could probably see that.
I guess if I
Okay.
get a report for my interviewer performance, it will be surprising as well. Like I say I noticed when I did it last time, it tells me I'd say too much, trying to confirm with
Mm-hmm.
the other side, and then
Mm-hmm.
uh it's very fresh for me to see that from that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Um
Mm-hmm.
anyway,
But yeah,
uh,
these suggestions, yeah, they make sense. So maybe what is the overall like how do I go back to the overall
you can just
here, right?
go to the menu and choosing whichever report you want to
Yeah,
read.
yeah. Okay, so it gave me a pretty high score, I'd say, overall,
Mhm.
which is great to hear. I think, yeah, I like the hiring suggestion here. Um, Again, I think for me, it would be the most valuable would see specific examples or like quotes
Mhm.
attached to some of this feedback. It would just it's like kind of hard to recall like what and hard to pinpoint what
Mhm.
specifically why it was 4 out of 5. Like where did I miss the mark here?
Yeah. Cool. And also, you're a very experienced, interviewer in this domain as well. So I'm also curious about from your perspective using this tool as a candidate. Do you think, by using this tool, it would have changed the outcome of interview? Or is, like simply just assisted with the communication?
I think yes, overall yes, because of the structure. First of all, the structure that it's giving, but
Hmm.
also I think that some of the answers that it gave, for example, on the scan questions and like a little bit more technical ones, those answers were just spot on. Sometimes it's you can't remember everything. And this is like the exact type of answer that would be like super helpful to just glance at and like, okay, yeah, privacy limitations like this and this. It definitely helps. With some other questions, such as, how to ensure cross-functional collaboration, like I think on a high level, if like I was a zero, I would probably answer this with the help of this tool, but I wouldn't answer it at the level I wanted to.
Hmm.
Uh, but I'm also looking at from kind of maybe a more like slightly more senior kind of role, maybe. But if I'm imagining it's a more junior role, like that would be probably much more valuable.
And then given this tool is available there, like would you change your interviewing techniques knowing a candidate is using such tools?
So if I, as an interviewer, knew
Yeah.
that interviewer is using it, I think, again, from what I've seen, it does a better job answering more specific, more maybe technical questions.
Hmm.
So I would maybe focus a little bit more on like different soft skills and situational questions where you need to give a specific example from your past experience, because this is where I think it just like does a slightly uh, not as great as the other
Hmm.
types of questions. But honestly, like I would have a hard time figuring out what I need to change in my approach. The only thing I can think of is like I expect you to answer in like 3 seconds from a question, which is just like not an experience I want to have a candidate because it's super stressful and just like it's not right.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. I feel eventually a lot of this knowledge is already processed, offered through ChatGPT or this AI agent, like
Mm-hmm.
solutions. And it's more about personal touch and experiences as value here, So I think
Mm-hmm.
getting into that direction is also something I see as well. And the last question is that as an interviewer, how would you feel about the candidate who choosing to using such tools during the interview? Do you have like a specific opinion or like a judgment about them?
Mm-hmm.
When you hear about it.
It's a good question. I think it will like I don't think I'll have a specific judgment. Like on one hand, I'm gonna think of, wow, like this candidate like is on top of all the new tools and they're doing everything they can to get the job, which is great. I don't think I consider it like cheating because at the end of the day, like you have to have the skills and you have to know your domain to pass the interview. But yeah, it's a tough one. But I would say like I would not automatically like reject a candidate for using it. I
Hmm.
would think that he or she is, just like smart to use that and take advantage and to get like ahead of other candidates by using it. And as long as we don't have like a specific policy in the company against this, I think I'm okay. Because again, I know that the candidate itself is still what matters the most, not the tools that they're using. And
Hmm.
that in their job, if they're using AI tools to be more productive and to be, to do a better job, like that's great. I'm all in for that. So this interview is kind of a proxy to how they would be doing their job. So I think I'm generally okay, but of course, like it's an interesting topic.
Cool. Thank you for your insight and thanks for your time today.